Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
For some reason, I'd always slept uneasily before I traveled. It didn't even matter what kind of trip was coming up. An ordinary business trip, a trip to a symposium, or just a vacation. Maybe it was the banal travel fever when I worried about everything I needed in my suitcase, and about how the road would turn out. Who cares? I couldn't sleep, that's all. After a peaceful count of imaginary lambs and fierce whispers of swearing, I still had to get up and drag myself to the kitchen for some sleeping pills. Then I managed to doze off, but the dreams were restless and often interrupted. This time, I dreamt about another mess. The shore was studded with river pebbles and looked more like a wild beach of some lake right in the city or not far from it. Such places are chosen on weekends by those who have no vacation in the summer. What to do? One would like to have a rest and to bathe in warm water. Though the shore was still sea. The sea was simply gray tender, and the wind made me squirm and pull the flaps of my jacket tighter. It was worth coming here. It's cold, and the weather is so cold that it's not a good idea to go swimming, but to drink hot tea. So much for a vacation. At the water's edge, facing the restless sea, stood a man in a black coat. From time to time he bent down, picked up a flat pebble, and launched it froggy over the waves. The wind ruffled his gray hair, but the stranger did not seem to notice the wind. A stranger? No, there was something very, very familiar in his posture, and in that peculiar manner of tossing the rolled stone first on the palm, and only then sending it skittering on the water. Dad? He turned around. A smile, the same warm and slightly shy smile, lit up his favorite face. And I wondered if it would take you long to realize it was me. He bent down again for a pebble. Dad, you're almost standing in water. You'll get your feet wet. You'll catch cold. Father winked nonchalantly. I'm sure I won't catch a cold. But you stay away, okay? It's not exactly vacation weather, is it? It's probably a good thing you didn't go. She didn't fly. Daddy, what are you doing? I'm already here. Splash. The pebble danced on the waves. I didn't fly, daughter. And you were right. Don't argue with Daddy. Okay, go back to sleep. The alarm clock will be ringing soon. Good to see you. Dad. The sound of the alarm clock ripped into my sleep, screwed into my ears, into my brain. Shit. Christina sat up in bed with a jerk, turning off the ringtone. For some reason, the alarm went off 3 hours earlier this time. Awakened by the call, Charlotte, the Persian cat, meowed unhappily. That doesn't make any sense, Christina muttered, yawning. Charlotte meowed again, staring at her mistress with amber yellow eyes. She was either confirming what she'd heard, or simply suggesting that she go back to sleep, if that was the case. Christina absently scratched the cat behind the ear. Sleep, sleep, she said quietly. Molly will come for you in the morning. Actually, Molly was my best and only friend who lived in the apartment next door, so I didn't have to take the cat away. It was enough just to drop by once a day to feed the little animal and tidy up the litter box. But the capricious Charlotte hated solitude, and in the apartment of Vera she always liked. There an aquarium fish, which is interesting to watch, and hamster Vincent in the cage, and even a cat, black and elegant Fim. Unbred, but with the habits of an English gentleman. You won't get bored. Christina looked out the window. It was still dark, not even the moon had disappeared. It shone like a lantern right through the window. Maybe that's what woke her up. I didn't want to go back to bed. Sleep was too restless, leaving a sticky, unpleasant feeling of longing and cold. She didn't want to lie in the dark. Christina got up and went into the kitchen, flicking every switch she could find on the way. A packed suitcase waited in the hallway for the morning. The bathroom was unexpectedly empty. Her favorite cream and perfume bottle had disappeared from the shelf. A passport and a plane ticket were found right on the table in the kitchen. Why is there so much anxiety in my soul? And this silence, quite unusual for summertime. How is it here? The sun gets warm and all the neighborhood punk goes out on the streets, with wine, with girls, with guitars. All night long you can hear concerts, girls' squeals, laughter. And tonight everyone can see, as if on cue, went to bed at 10 o'clock in the evening. This silence, which was not disturbed even by the rustling of the leaves, also made me feel uncomfortable. Christina turned on the kettle. At least let it make a noise. The sound of boiling water is also a sound, and not a bad one. When the kettle boils, it means that there is a living soul in the house, that the spoon is about to clink on the sugar bowl, the cup lightly taps on the countertop, the fridge opens, and they take out cakes or jam. I didn't feel like drinking coffee, but the tea. While it was getting cold, Christina went through the apartment again, out of curiosity. Everything was in its place, not a speck or a speck of dust anywhere. Now she was almost angry at herself for her long-standing habit of cleaning up before she left. What was she going to do now? Stuff packed, the house was cleaned, except to check again to see if she had everything? Christina turned on the light and dragged the bright orange suitcase into the middle of the room. Should I go through it again? Charlotte squinted lazily at her mistress with round amber eyes. From her feline point of view, Christina was fussing too much. Charlotte herself believed that fussiness was not a quality that could adorn an Oriental princess, and was always calm, graceful, and unhurried. The things in the suitcase were stowed as they should be. Christina made sure she hadn't forgotten anything, and she even put a folded 4-page sheet of paper in her cosmetic bag with a full list of what she'd taken with her. Alex had always laughed at her pedantry. Alex, they'd split up 6 months ago, and Christina felt a little hurt in her heart that their divorce had gone so quietly and amicably. After all, they had lived together for 10 years, and yet they hadn't even had a fight for the sake of decency. Just one day, Alex, returning from another shift, drank strong, as he liked, tea, and then routinely said that he had fallen in love with someone else and would now live with her. Christina nodded. Who this other woman was, how long they had been together, whether she was local or whether he had someone on his watch, all that was of no interest to her at all. It didn't hurt her to hear her husband's confession. Christina, marveling at her own insensitivity, thought about the fact that at last she could change the hated curtains in the kitchen and no longer lay a tablecloth on the table. Alex, generally level-headed and cooperative, had his little quirks. For instance, he thought the curtains should be lace and the table should be covered with a white tablecloth. He was always kicking Charlotte out of bed, and now Christina was glad of the opportunity to sleep with her fluffy pet in her arms. At least we don't have children, she thought, and offered to help her husband pack. Truth be told, Alex's new family didn't work out, and after a couple of months he asked to go back. But Christina, by then, had tasted the sweet taste of freedom and didn't want to give it up at all. All the more so because things were going very well at work. She had been made chief physician. There were 3 applicants for the job: her, Nancy, and Charles, a rich guy and longtime protege of a famous surgeon in the city, who had given up practicing in the last couple of years to become a teacher. Charles was the medical luminary's grandson or nephew. Christina did not go into details. It was enough that Charles was the misfortune of the clinic. He came to work, it seemed, solely to woo nurses and pretty patients. The latter often reciprocated, which was especially odd, because Charles was medically very stupid. He genuinely confused ascorbic acid with acetylsalicylic acid, believed that smoking promoted the production of nicotinic acid in the human body, and prescribed glycine for insomnia. When it came to choosing a chief physician, Charles went on a 3-day wild binge and finally gave a formal reason to fire himself. Thank God, sighed in the resident's room. Charles can't get a needle into a vein. He's not much of a doctor. Nancy's candidacy was slaughtered because of her family background. Your youngest is 2 years old, Nancy. You'll be on sick leave, you know that. Christina felt guilty about her colleague. Maybe if she hadn't divorced at the time, things would have turned out differently. They would have said, "You're Christina, you're about to go on maternity leave," but Nancy has already shot off. But it turned out the way it did. They chose between a married woman and a single one, and chose the single one with a simple explanation. But Christina is a single woman. She has nothing better to do. Luda, however, was not offended. You know, she admitted at Christina's inauguration party, "I'm honestly glad they picked you. My husband is 8 years younger than me, and my husband is 8 years younger than me, and my husband is 8 years younger than me. It's a long way to go. Other people do it together somehow, Christina objected. Nancy chuckled. Well, let them do it together. Who's against it? I don't want to. I want to work in peace from now on. She picked up a slice of tomato with her fork and mashed it on her plate. And until now. And the second slice lay at some distance from the first. The rest of the time it's home, family, chores, and the rest of the vegetable garden. Less money, and to hell with it. It's not the main thing in life, believe me. Believe. Christina poured wine for herself and Nancy. Then here's to making things work out the way you want them to. Here's to that. Nancy vigorously encouraged. Christina often recalled their conversation. Especially in the beginning, when there was so much work that sometimes she was away from home for 2 days at a time. Money isn't the main thing. Yes, Nancy was right about that. Sometimes getting a good night's sleep was more important than a pay raise. But Christina wasn't used to giving up, and money wasn't the only thing that mattered. She liked to grow, and a promotion meant a new step in her career. It had already dawned outside. It was summertime, 4 in the morning. Christina regretted the hours of sleep she had lost. I'll sleep on the plane, she reassured herself, and was about to finally take her cold tea when the phone rang softly, announcing a new message. Martin, an old friend of Dad's, wrote, Christina, baby, if you're awake, call me. That's all I need. Today's dream came to mind. Her father had warned her that she wouldn't go to the sea. What if Uncle Martin got sick? He was in his 80s, and like all doctors, he hated treatment and refused to consider himself ill, even if it was obvious. Christina, shaking hands, dialed Martin's number, confused, then remembered that she didn't have to do it manually. It was all nerves. She was really frightened. The old man had lived all alone since his wife's death. He had no children, no grandchildren. Oh, not the heart. They answered her right away. You didn't wake me, did you, child? Martin's voice was unseasonably chipper. No. Uncle Martin, what happened? The heart. No, Christy, he laughed. I just want to ask you something. You see, I have to go away. Where to? She interrupted. To Germany. I'm going for treatment, Christy. Maybe for a long time. I have a favor to ask of you. Look after my clinic while you're on vacation. There's something wrong there. So Christina moved her cup toward her and shifted her eyebrows in concentration. Let's take it in order, Uncle Martin. Martin lived in a neighboring town, only an hour away. The clinic he ran had been operating successfully for 25 years and was reputed to be one of the best in the state. Although, of course, in this story, as in any other, not everything went smoothly. Uncle Martin didn't like to talk about it, but Christina knew from her father that in the 95th, racketeers raided the clinic, demanding tribute from the manager. Martin tried to refuse, after which he spent 2 months in the ICU with multiple fractures and internal injuries. Bats and rubber truncheons were terrible weapons, and the thugs knew their business. It was the first, and probably the last, time Christina saw her father cry. It was he, a highly skilled surgeon, who had done all he could to fix his friend. But when she returned home, her father went out on the balcony, lit a cigarette, and little Christina saw her father's broad shoulders twitching. And in the evening, she overheard her parents talking in the kitchen. Like a construction set, my father sighed. You have no idea, and it's a good thing you don't. Will he be able to move? Mom asked in a whisper. Walk, at least with a stick. My father was silent for a long time. I sincerely hope, he finally said, that at least he stays alive. No one ever found out how the case was resolved, but a couple of weeks after the gang hit, one of Martin's assailants took a bullet under unspecified circumstances. Martin thought it was a coincidence that could equally likely have worked against him as well as for him. After all, the deceased's friends and colleagues might have thought that the head of the clinic might have been involved in the murder, and revenge would have been inevitable. True, he was lucky. A rumor spread through the city that the racketeer had been ordered by his rejected mistress, who was the wife of a local official, and not the least of them. In short, the case was hushed up, and Martin worked quietly for a while. Since then, however, his heart had been racing, and in '97, when the notorious gang in town sent their delegates to him again, Uncle Martin had his first heart attack. Then the gangsters demanded that he turn the hospital into an infirmary for their fellow criminals. After the hospital, Martin spent a month lying in Christina's parents' summer house, not knowing what to expect from the future. But then he was lucky for the second time. The bandit gang had been caught and sent to places not so distant, and their rivals, comparing the facts, decided that Martin was not so simple, and apparently he had extensive connections in the authorities. Of course, it was impossible to prove it, but it was impossible to disprove it. The brothers, rightly judging that God protects the well-to-do, decided to steer clear of the clinic. And now, Christy, he complained, "I don't know what to think. For 2 years, the clinic has had almost no income. 6 months ago, I fired the head doctor, and believe me, not for nothing. The guy was pissed. I was hoping things would pick up after that, but now, I don't care if I have to close. Our paperwork's fine, I've seen it myself, but in reality, people won't come to us. What's going on? I don't understand. Maybe you're not hurting as much as you used to." Christina joked awkwardly, but luckily Uncle Martin didn't notice. "People get sick at all times, kiddo. And then, we expanded 5 years ago. We opened an additional department of cosmetology and plastic surgery. I'll never believe that our women don't want to be beautiful." It suddenly dawned on Christina. She remembered that in her own city there was a private dentistry with a luxurious package of services, up to the complete cure of all diseased teeth in one day, under general anesthesia. It would seem that everyone who was afraid of the dentist's chair should immediately go crazy with joy and make a mile-long line for an appointment. Is not it great to forget about your own horror in front of the dentist, fall asleep, and wake up with a Hollywood smile? After all, it's a dream. But in reality, the clinic made almost nothing. The price tag on these sweet pleasures of the patient was such that most people simply did not have the money for it. The dream cost as much as regular people made in a year. And those few who could afford it preferred to have their teeth treated in Switzerland. "What are your prices, Uncle Martin?" Christina asked cautiously. "Isn't it expensive?" "Come on," said Uncle Martin angrily. "You know my policy. Less is more. The prices are the usual. City average, discount system, promotions. Oh, I've already cracked my head. Figure it out, Christy, at least try to figure it out. If you don't figure it out, that's okay. You can at least keep an eye on the clinic. Will you do it?" Christina was silent for a few seconds. On the table in front of her, a glossy plane ticket gleamed. An image of a flying airliner against a piercing blue sky. Now this calming image was getting on her nerves. She must have been having a dream. She would not fly to the sea. Christina pushed the ticket away from her with her little finger. "I will, Uncle Martin," she promised. "I'll be with you in the morning. But let's do this. So as not to waste time, send me the documents. All the accounts. I'll sit down right now and ask around." Martin clearly did not like this idea. "Christy," he hesitated. "What are you going to get into now? You should come and have a quiet look. Where you don't understand, they'll help you." It's clear. Out of his old, conservative habit, Uncle Martin was afraid to trust serious information to technology. Who knows, he probably thought, what if they intercepted it? The Nendys had taught him to trust anything forever. Flash drives, floppy disks, CDs, any electronic medium posed a security risk. Passwords are nonsense. He often repeated, driving system administrators to hysterics. Anything man-made can be hacked. There is no perfect security. "Uncle Martin," Christina said softly, "I'm going to create a new email account for myself right now. Then I'll give you the address, and you can send the documents to it. They just won't have time to hack into it. I'll download the files as soon as I get them, and I'll destroy the box with all its contents. All right?" Such an outwardly complicated system of conspiracy must have convinced the old man. Okay, he grudgingly agreed. "Just make sure you destroy it. And don't print anything, Christy, do you hear?" "Nothing." "Well, I'm waiting for you to give me the go-ahead." Christina reached out and went to the stove to make coffee. Black with cinnamon and pepper. And strong. The thick, viscous liquid left a tarry taste in her mouth instead of coffee. Christina glanced at her watch. It was 6 in the morning. She'd been sitting at her laptop for 2 hours, slurping down the strongest coffee she could find. And she'd even forgotten to put sugar in it, which made the terry bitter flavor unmistakable. Business. She pushed the laptop away and rubbed her eyes hard with both hands. The cosmetologists were ready to slap her hands for that no stretching of the delicate skin of her eyelids. But that wasn't the issue right now. Martin was a brilliant diagnostician, a democratic leader, and just a great person. But his documentation skills were abysmal, or more accurately, he could not relate cause and effect. Data from the registrar said that over the past month in the clinic went to 8 people. Catastrophically few. In total, the reasons for referrals were trifling. They brought in $62,000 income. For a clinic of this level, that's not money either. And yet, medications and bandages were ordered monthly, and the bills ran into the hundreds of thousands. With such a low workload, with bandages being stored for so long, like many medications. Moreover, several of the positions from the Human Resources Department were questionable. Here, for example, are the junior technicians. Martin said there were only 4 orderlies in the clinic, working 2 per shift. Then where did the 5th nurse come from in the paperwork? Mariana, Warren 1959. She works full-time, which means she gets paid accordingly. Or the system administrator. There's only 1 person in the clinic, but he has 2 jobs. 1 person doesn't work 2 jobs. There are 2 of them. Here you go, David and Jacob. Christina had heard of this practice. Someone, usually someone in the management's inner circle, say, a nephew student who needed pocket money for coffee and beer, was placed in a trifling position, often created especially for this purpose. After that, the person might not show up for work at all. This was unimportant. The money dripped, and everyone was happy. But Uncle Martin certainly didn't have any such prodigies. Christina would have known. So someone was doing his dirty work right in front of the superintendent's nose. There was still a matter of the chief physician who had been fired. When Christina saw the name Frank Staples and the date of his birth, she blinked and looked closely to see if she had read it correctly. But there could be no mistake. She had known Frank since she was a student. He'd even tried to woo her in 3rd year, but she'd been attracted to guys with long hair and guitars and muscles of steel. Subtile with glasses and chunky-eared Frank did not fit her type, and so the girl rejected him. They remained good pals, though, and Christina knew none the more honest and trustworthy of the 2. Then they even worked together for a while, and never, not once, did Frank give her any reason to doubt his honesty. And now Uncle Martin says he fired Frank for gray schemes? No, that was ruled out. That's ridiculous. Stupid is stupid. But from the looks of it, Frank was set up. But who the hell could have done it? It's hard to understand, Uncle Martin, Christina admitted. But there are a lot of strange things. And I'm sure, that Frank Staples has been framed. I know him well, you see, and, well, I don't believe that Frank. The stubborn old man shrugged his shoulders. Who could have set him up? And if they did, then what do we have? What? And that your Frank is a fool. And he has no business being in a responsible position. So I was right to fire him. He may be a fool, Christina said quietly, but not a scoundrel. And she added louder, I, Uncle Martin, have decided to keep a low profile for now. I made an appointment quietly with my therapist. I'll come and see what's going on. That's what you do. Martin rejoiced. That's a good idea. You know my number in case of trouble. Now I have to go. Baby, I'm sorry. Check-in's about to start. The old man's apartment was stuffy, and there was a thick layer of dust everywhere. So Christina, as soon as she kicked off her sneakers, went to the window and opened it wide. She had been allergic to dust since she was a child. A rush of fresh air with a hint of floral scents burst into the room. There were linden trees growing in the yard. She stood like that for a few minutes, breathing in that favorite smell from her childhood. It had been with her all her life, her parents' daksha, and the 2 beautiful linden trees that grew right outside the windows. My mother sometimes scolded that they kept the sunlight out of the rooms, but every time my father jokingly suggested cutting them down, she was indignant. How could anyone cut down such beauty? There were linden trees in the city too. They grew up in the park, where 16-year-old Christina, secretly from her parents, would sneak out to see her lover. The guitarist medalist Thomas was already 19, and he was sure his destiny was to become a star of the stage. "You'll see, Christina," he said. "The whole world will love our music because it's real. Truthful, honest, that's what's important." She didn't know anything about music, but she believed Thomas. How could she not? He was the only one with such bottomless, blue eyes and a mane of blonde curls. Christina was sure that soon all the girls in the world would be crazy about those eyes, and she was jealous of them in advance. There were also linden trees in the grove in front of the medical university. Old, lush, they generously poured their fragrance into the air. For her first wedding anniversary, Christina asked her husband to get her a linden blossom perfume somewhere. They cost crazy money at the time, but Alex was always a husser. On the day of the anniversary, Christina received the cherished bottle and never tried on other fragrances again. There wasn't much time left before the appointment, but there was no hurry. Martin's clinic was a stone's throw away from home. Christina walked leisurely, noting from afar the pleasant facade of the clinic. It was obvious that repairs had been made here recently. There was still a slight smell of paint in the air. The first floor, as it was visible through huge transparent windows, was trimmed with light wood panels, and instead of standard, for such places, sofas, there were cozy armchairs covered with a cloth and small flowers. There were flowers in bright ceramic pots on the windowsills, on the walls, on the reception desk. The second and third floors, apparently the hospital was located there, were painted pale pink from the facade, and the small balconies were also decorated with vases with some brightly colored creepers. Christina never thought a clinic could seem cozy, but this one was just that. "Christina?" asked the girl behind the counter. "Yes," Christina confirmed. "I have a 4 o'clock appointment with the therapist." Aha! The receptionist clicked her computer keys and smiled. "Yes, that's right. Come in, the doctor is waiting for you. Go up to the second floor, to room 201. Isn't it an inpatient facility?" Christina wondered. The girl shrugged her shoulders unhappily. "Actually, yes, that is. It was there before. And now you can see for yourself. There is an outflow of customers. So we decided to move some of the specialists to the second floor." The lobby was indeed deserted. What's more, even the telephones, an entirely unprecedented thing for a clinic, were silent. What, at last, was going on here? Christina felt that Uncle Martin, with his diagnostic instincts honed over the years, had made an accurate characterization of all the oddities. There's something wrong here. "That's right, Uncle Martin," Christina whispered, heading for the stairs. "Something's wrong, but what's the reason?" The stairs were narrow, but that was all right. The building itself wasn't very big. Muffled voices came from somewhere above. The intonations were angry, harsh, as if someone was cursing. Christina was about to listen, but it was not necessary. "What are you doing out here with your bucket?" A man's voice boomed over my head. Then there was a thump, a metallic clang, and a murmur of water. "Kicked the bucket," Christina guessed, and as if to confirm her thoughts, water dripped into the stairwell, and the smell of soap solution was in the air. "Dr. Charles," the woman's voice was shaky and pleading. "I didn't do it on purpose. The stairs are narrow, and I have to wash them. It's a clinic, not a pigsty." "Hammy-I-I-ye," said the man they called Dr. Charles sarcastically. "Well, here's my answer to you. Pick up the bucket and get out of here. You'll get your paycheck in accounting, and I don't need a bore here. Any questions?" Christina, without waiting for an answer, resolutely turned back. "Have you been admitted yet?" The receptionist was surprised. "No, it's just, I got an urgent call from work. Anyway, I have to be there," Christina lied cheerfully, "so the visit will have to be postponed. Give my apologies to the doctor." She almost ran out of the clinic and immediately found herself in the warm but heavy summer rain. The receptionist shouted something at her, but the noise of the rain made the words hard to understand. Christina put her hand to her ear through the glass and pointed to the front desk. "I'll call you back." Then she pointed to her watch and guiltily fluttered her hands. What could you do? Urgent business. Across the street, She spotted what looked like a cozy coffee shop and quickly ran across the street. She could wait out the rain there too. And at the same time, she could think hard about her plan. She chose a table by the window, where she had a good view of the entrance to the clinic. A waitress with amusing elf ears placed a menu in front of Christina. "What will you be ordering?" "Tonight we have the Toruvia Lute on the menu." "Excuse me?" "Pancakes with orange cheese mousse. Also dal blatin. What's this?" "Valley of Flowers," the waitress patiently explained. "A fruit tart with vanilla and blackberry cream, with rose petals and candied violets." Christina laughed. She was so busted. From ship to ball, from the strange clinic to the Elven Kingdom. Only now did she notice that the walls of the coffee house were covered in runic ligature, and that there were paintings of elves in the piers. There were crossed arrows above the front door as decoration. "Do you have any cappuccinos?" Christina giggled. The elven girl smiled understandingly. "Don't worry, we will." "So cappuccino?" Christina nodded. "And cheesecake." And also, she suddenly felt terribly hungry. No wonder she was. She'd forgotten to eat breakfast with all the excitement. "Bring me that Valley of Flowers of yours. Just a big piece." The waitress disappeared, and Christina squinted as she studied the entrance to the clinic. The first thing that caught her eye was that the cars parked nearby were brand new and rather expensive, but no one was entering or exiting the clinic. So the cars probably belonged to the staff. I wonder where the doctors, working in a clearly unprofitable medical institution, got the money for such toys. "Dal Blatana," the elf chirped as she set the plate on the table. "A big slice, just like you asked, and a pecan cheesecake and a cappuccino." "Thank you." Christina smiled as she took the first bite of the fruity floral cake into her mouth. The pastry with the exotic name was surprisingly delicious. The airy dough melted as soon as it touched the tongue, but the filling was thick and surprisingly delicate, slowly revealing the most exquisite flavors. There were notes of fresh cherries, an almost imperceptible hint of black currant, and a refreshing melon flavor. The subtle scent of rose hovered over the plate, and the candied violets tasted like the finest caramel candy. "Do you like it?" the waitress murmured softly, and Christina responded sincerely. "Wow." Before she knew it, she had swallowed the entire portion without even touching her coffee. As she raised her cup to her lips, Christina looked again at the entrance to the clinic and nodded contentedly. This was what she'd been waiting for. As she opened the heavy door, a heavy, casually dressed woman in her 50s stepped out into the street. She looked dejected. So this was the cleaner that the mysterious Dr. Charles had fired 20 minutes before. Christina felt sorry for this woman who had lost perhaps her only job today. But there were two important circumstances in this situation that reduced the degree of drama. First of all, Christina knew from experience, you have to run away from autocratic bosses. And the sooner the better. If you work under a bad boss, you will never be at an advantage. Such managers, even if they pay €1 million a month, exhaust the workers' nerves by $2 million, and also not at all in dollars. So it's quite possible that the janitor will find a job that's more profitable for her right today. Second, firing the janitor meant that there was a vacancy in the clinic. The former cleaner crossed the road and stopped in front of the coffee shop, looking at the sign in confusion. The rain, though not as heavy, continued, but the woman did not dare enter. "And I'm in luck," grinned Christina mentally and waved her hand invitingly. The woman outside the window looked at her incomprehensively. Christina waved again, and this time she succeeded. The woman shrugged and headed toward the entrance of the coffee shop. "Have a seat," Christina invited. "It seems that you lost your job today. I happen to hear." "Yes," sighed the woman, "bad luck." Her voice was very young, and when she looked closely, Christina realized with amazement that the former cleaner was hardly older than she was. She probably wasn't even 40 yet, 37 or 38. It was just her prematurely bloated figure and heavy stride that made her look older. And then there was that old-fashioned knot of gray hair. "My name is Christina," she smiled. "And you are?" "Camille," the woman answered, and looked tiredly out the window. "It seems to be raining all night long. I don't know how to get home now." Yes, she did seem dead tired. She didn't even ask why the well-groomed stranger had dragged her to the cafe. It was time to take the initiative. I'll tell you what, Camille, Christina decided, you and I are going to eat first. There's a sumptuous pie with some fancy name. Never mind. You must try it. And she assessed Camille's pale skin and the total lack of blush on her cheeks. You need your vitamins. So pie and berry morsel. But I can't, protested Camille, but Christina brushed him off. Stop it, it's my treat. And when you go, I'll make you a good deal. Camille ate leisurely, clearly enjoying the taste of the elven pastry and sipping her current morsel blissfully. I came into town this morning, Christina said when the food was done. I'm staying at my uncle's apartment. He's away now, and his apartment. In a word, it needs a general cleaning. If you're free now, maybe you'd be willing to clean my place, say, once every 2 days. I don't need sterility. It's enough to vacuum and mop the floors. For money, let's say $20,000 a month would be fine with you. Camille grinned bitterly. You ask. I was paid half as much at the clinic. So we have a deal. Christina got excited. Then maybe I can show you around right now. It's not far from here. And then I have an umbrella in my apartment, and I'll give it to you so you can get home safely. This time, no one thought to contradict her. In fact, Christina considered herself quite far from the idea of charity. By hiring Olga, she was solving two important problems at once. First of all, it was necessary to get rid of the dust. And then Camille could become a valuable source of information about the clinic and its inhabitants. In just an hour of conversation, Christina managed to find out some interesting things. Camille said that the clinic was quite peaceful while Frank Staples was in charge. But one day, coming to work, Camille heard a conversation between Dr. Charles, Frank's deputy at the time, and the system administrator. The server room was, as always, noisy and hot. She couldn't make out the words, but from time to time the two got into quite a laugh. Finally, the sysadmin concluded loudly, "Let's get a life now." The next day, Frank was scandalously fired, and Dr. Charles took his place. From that day on, the changes began. To begin with, the new head doctor forbade the relatives to visit the patients in the hospital. He explained that this was due to health regulations, apparently known only to him. You don't have any treatment anyway. Christina was surprised. They even converted the second floor into waiting rooms. Camille snorted indignantly. Were you at the third one? They crammed people in there like herrings in a barrel. It's painful to look. And on the second one, there are only a few offices, and the rest are VIP rooms. For the elite, so to speak. So, murmured Christina, why then? She could not fully open up to her new acquaintance, and the bits of information she was able to get raised even more questions. All right, let's say documents are falsified. This is probably the task of the system administrator, and a solid portion of the patients do not show up in the reports. The money ends up in the pockets of who? The head doctor and the sysadmin. That's understandable. But there are other doctors. There are nurses, finally. And they're all silent? I don't think so. So they're in on it too. No, it was time for another visit to the clinic after all. Charles, once the unhappiness and disgrace of a clinic in a neighboring town, and now the head physician of Dr. Charles, looked with disgust at the unkempt woman who had come to take the place of the cleaning lady. You know, he grumbled, this isn't a train station diner or wherever you use to work. You need special skills. Christina nodded. A station diner, my ass. But in this case, it was a compliment. Christina had spent the morning in front of the mirror, painstakingly masking the traces of her grooming and choosing the most unassuming outfit possible. Obviously, the transformation succeeded. The chief physician saw her as a very overwrought and very needy woman of indeterminate age, and what was particularly pleasant, he did not recognize her as a former colleague. Talent. Christina mentally praised herself. If I ever get kicked out of medicine, I'll go into makeup. We'll wait to make it official, Charles decided. You'll be on probation for a month, and then we'll see. I'll give you $5,000. If you do well, you'll get double that. If you do well, of course. You're not here to wipe up drunken vomit, as I'm sure you're used to. Mind you, I might not have to pay you for the probationary period. But you do look very, hungry. A plus. And only because I'm a kind man. The generosity of this offer made Christina almost physically ill. After all, it could have been another woman who really needed the money. Maybe even with children. 5,000. At best, 10. For a moment, she wanted to open up, to tell this smug bastard who she was. You can't. For now, she had to be quiet and obedient. Thank you, Dr. Charles, she said, her mouth whispering diligently. Go to the back room, he tossed nonchalantly. The buckets, the rags, they're all there. You start right away. Come on, don't be a wuss, you scavenger. And he put his hands in his pockets and turned away to the window. Kamel was telling the truth. On the 3rd floor, there was no room to spare. There were 16 in each of the 8 rooms, not counting the corridors, which were also full of beds. Walking past the 1st room, Christina heard a nurse yelling at a helpless old woman. Clench your fist, you wretch. Can't you see I can't put the drip in? Come on, harder. I can't see a vein. Do I have to give you medicine with my mind? Christina hurried away from the door, just in time to avoid bumping into the outraged nurse, who was out of breath and red with indignation. You, she shouted, catching the janitor by the floor of her robe. Got any smokes? Christina quickly shook her head. I don't smoke, sorry. The nurse walked her around in a circle and gave a satisfied chuckle. You don't smoke, and you mop the floors. She wiped her hand on her own uniform. Are you, by any chance, contagious? Charles is like that, always feeling sorry for the homeless. How do you have money for smokes? You're a pauper. And she hurried toward the stairs. Christina's resentment took her breath away. For what? Oh, I wish I could catch up with that cheeky white otter and kick her. You can't. Now it was a matter of honor to get to the bottom of the mess that was going on here. She ran into the staff twice more during the day. The first time I passed by the staircase where the doctors had set up their own smoking room. 2 young guys were standing, leaning against the wall. One of them was dressed in a standard hospital uniform, and the other was in jeans and a stretchy t-shirt. Admin, thought Christina, and immediately she was convinced she'd guessed correctly. You're doing a good job. The one in uniform stretched out lazily. I even envy you. You sit in the server room and do not breathe a word. And now the chief is stingy, almost paying. Does he still pay you off? The admin shrugged his shoulders. Charles is a man of moods, you know. When it's okay and when it's not. Christina pretended to be lost. Can you tell me where I can pour out the dirty water? She asked. And you drink it, advised the system administrator and laughed deafeningly. That's true, said the doctor. Aren't you completely illiterate? Haven't you heard that there's not enough fresh water in the world? If we pour it out, what will it be? All right, Stephen, stop mocking me. The admin slapped him on the shoulder. She's really going to have a drink, if the wise men tell her to. He turned to Christina. Walk down the corridor past the nurse's station. Turn right at the corner, there's the toilet. Just pour water into the toilet and get fresh water in the sink. Don't get it wrong. Christina nodded. There was no anger, nor was there any resentment. She just didn't see the cackling types as people anymore. They were just common apes, and it was silly to be offended by them. And so was expecting them to behave like humans. A bonus, girls. Heard Christina as she walked past the nurse's station. The nurse, the one who had recently yelled at the sick old woman, was handing out puffy envelopes. Christina hurried to the bathroom to avoid being caught, but ran into the head doctor right at the door. The humanoid decided to play a joke on her by sending her to the men's room instead of the women's room. Are you blind or a man? Charles yelled and kicked the bucket of dirty water with a swing. It seemed to be his favorite pastime. Christina bounced to the side, and the water splashed all over the newly scrubbed floor. What are you staring at? Thundered the chief doctor. Put that away. Excuse me, Dr. Charles, came a low voice from behind Christina's back. She looked back. An orderly in her 40s, with a strand of gray in his dark hair, was in front of her. It's my fault, he continued. I sent it to the men's room by mistake, so I'll clean it up myself. Charles rolled his eyes theatrically and waved his hand as he walked past. The orderly silently picked up the bucket and began to collect water with a rag. Christina noticed that he was limping a little on his left leg. "I've had it since I was 10, he smiled, tracing the direction of her gaze. His smile was surprisingly bright and warm. I pulled the little girl out from under the truck's wheels, but I hesitated, and there it was. "Oh, well, you're lucky." Christina nodded. "Lucky." He smiled that wonderful smile of his again. "And don't be offended by Charles," he said. "Look at it this way. You need a job, don't you?" "I do. So do it. And what he performs there, that's his own one-actor theater, you know? What's your name?" "I'm Christina," she replied, deciding there was no point in introducing herself by an assumed name. "I'm Kevin, so we've met." He patted the girl on the shoulder. "Don't grieve, Christina." In the evening, sitting in Martin's apartment, Christina took out her notebook and went over her notes again. So, the talentless Charles has managed to get the honest and capable Frank to take his job, and the system administrator helped him in this scumbagery. That was the first thing. Secondly, Charles managed quite quickly to entangle the entire clinic in his fraudulent web. He had fed the doctors and nurses with bonuses, so he could count on their silence. And our swindler hides the real income of the clinic with the help of the same false statements. No, Christina shook her head. If she sought support, it was from people like herself, the orderlies and cleaners, who were not considered human beings here, and therefore were paid a pittance. There was still the unresolved issue of the VIP rooms. Today, she had already cleaned it up, and she was very surprised, because there was no luxury comfort there, not even close. The beds were only better, not so saggy. But overall, it was an ordinary room for two. Was all the extra comfort just isolation from the noise of the common rooms? It was strange, considering that a suite cost twice as much. In any case, it was worth reporting back on her observations. Uncle Martin asked her to let him know as soon as possible what she could find out. She turned on her laptop, and after thinking it over again, began to write a letter to Martin. The next day brought a new surprise for Christina. The head nurse sent a cleaner to mop the floors in the warehouse, though she did not attend, giving only a warning. If you soak something, you'll pay it back from your paycheck. Christina wasn't going to move anything. She was interested in something else. After a quick check of the medical supplies, she was convinced that most of them were pennies, which could not possibly be worth the money that was listed in the estimates. Here was another mystery solved. Charles was ordering cheap drugs. He was passing them off as high-priced. "What the hell are you doing here?" There was a shout from the door. Christina turned around. Dr. Charles, his face white with rage, was stepping on her. Yes, she had never seen a Charles like that before. "I can't hear the answer," he shouted. "What do you want here?" "Answer me. I'll fire the damn thief. Jenna sent her here." The chief physician turned around with a jerk and stared into Kevin's calm eyes. "Jenna asked me to clean the place and mop the floors. I heard it myself. Ask her yourself if you don't believe me." Charles cursed briefly and foully and ran away. "He didn't turn the bucket over this time," Christina remarked coldly. "He doesn't like me." "And he doesn't like anybody," Kevin laughed. "You know you better go, or he'll be back before the concert's over." Christina picked up the bucket and walked out of the warehouse. That Kevin was good after all. But something was bothering her, as if something important had just escaped her attention. What? Suddenly it became clear to her. Kevin had sent her out of the warehouse for some reason, but hadn't followed her out. God, couldn't he have too? She rushed back, hoping to catch the orderly in the act. No, Kevin mumbled, clutching the empty package of antibiotics to his chest. "It's not what you think. I'm not a thief. The drugs have been written off and paid for anyway, so I'm taking them to my kids. I have 3 kids, you know? A boy and 2 girls. 5, 6, and 4 years old," says the nurse. "And they're not mine, they're my eldest's sisters. We're orphans. She died in a fire, along with her husband. And I took her children in. They can't go to an orphanage. Recently, my little one got sick. He needs treatment, but I don't have any money. My sister and I grew up in an orphanage. I can't find a better job. Who needs me with a limp?" "Oh, shit." Christina exhaled. The orderly blinked at a loss. He didn't know what to make of her statement. "No, no, Kevin," she waved, and stepped toward him. She put her arm around his skinny shoulders and pulled him against her. He gave in unwillingly. "No, don't be afraid." Unrecorded, it's you know. It's not even called theft. It's all right. I'll help you. A cleaner and an orderly is a great power, he grumbled into her shoulder. Power is power, Christina winked at him. It doesn't ask for duties. After the second report, Martin called her himself. "That's it, Uncle Martin," Christina said into the receiver without waiting for a greeting. The old man sighed. "Bad things, Christina. We're going to get lost, but I got an idea. Come work for me, baby. If you say yes, I'll send the order for your appointment right away." "Uncle Martin," she said at a loss. "The salary is 3 times higher than your previous one. And also, Christina, I'm not young. God didn't give me children, and you know it. I feel better about leaving, knowing that you'd inherit the clinic." "Uncle Martin," said Christina again, and she was silent, not knowing what else to say. "So I'm sending orders," he said and hung up. Christina dropped her head on the table. "I'm going crazy with all this," she sighed longingly. Now she had to think about how to clean up the mess that would be left behind by Charles. And there would have to be a complete change of staff. Where would she get so many new ones? Where can we get so many specialists and nurses at the same time? Christina said at the morning meeting. Her appearance in her own car and with Martin's orders in her hands had a bomb effect. The only way to calm everyone down at once was to hold a general meeting. Of course, Christina went on, "It's not going to take a day to recruit new personnel. But I think a couple of weeks should be enough. So I hope to have your resignations on my desk by tonight. It will allow each of you to save face and not be fired. All of this does not apply to the junior staff, but specifically to the orderlies. Here too, we're going to have a little change. From now on, Kevin will be the senior orderly. That's all." In the crowd, Jenna's face flashed red with anger, and Charles's face flashed resentfully. But none of that mattered. Christina had a job waiting. Epilogue. 2 years after the events described above, Martin passed away. In the will of the deceased, the clinic passed into the full ownership of Christina. Kevin, having been promoted, was able to pay for the surgery and get rid of his limp for good. He and Christina, soon married, are raising foster children together and are expecting the birth of their first child.